Hello from your favorite Grasslands PR team. This week we're back with another reason why these overlooked and underappreciated ecosystems are objectively the best biome. I'm Nicole.
I'm Alan.
And I'm Rachel. And I get to talk about stuff this week, so...
Whoa.
Wow. I probably bit off more than I can chew as usual, so let's talk about Africa today.
Just the whole continent?
Actually, yes.
Okay.
The whole continent's worth of savanna habitats, the African savanna biome, is the topic today.
Wow, okay.
Made possible by one study that was published by or in the New Phytologist in 2018. Which was a multi-government collaboration basically assessing how African savannas work and how they are affected by humans and how to mitigate those changes. And I was like, holy smokes, there is so much crammed into this one analysis and review, and it does such a good job of like giving an overview of the things affecting this entire continent's worth of ecology that I was like, why don't we just do like a review of this one freaking paper and I can tell you all the cool things I learned from this one paper. Okay, great. So the name of this paper is called Human Impacts in African Savannas Are Mediated by Plant Functional Traits. It was published, like I said, in 2018. Some of the published authors include Colin Osborne, Tristan Charles Dominue, and some other people. So that would be the et al. Of the citation, you know. The point of this paper, really, because I said it was a multi-government sort of enterprise, was to present ideas and perspectives on African savannas that they discussed at a meeting of like UK and South African scientists in 2015. And the reason is because African savannas, like so many other places, are undergoing some like really rapid changes at a pretty continental scale as humans encroach on natural habitats and stuff. But unlike forested biomes, people aren't really paying attention to the ecology of savannas specifically. And the things that people tend to use in like tropical forest ecology don't really apply well in savannas, and yet like people are still using those. So, you know, this like also fits in super well with the whole premise of our podcast and our organization, which is that grasslands just need better PR and better information. And that's like precisely what these researchers and the authors of this paper were pointing out, which is that like, hey, as is often true in savannas, if we're going to avoid an environmental crisis in these grassland landscapes, we need to understand how they work. Please, dear God, people, listen to us. We should cut down more trees, basically.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
But not all of the trees.
No, but like a lot of them can go. That's
Yeah.
fine. You know, again, savannas. So, you know, they should have some trees.
Yeah.
But yeah. The authors of the paper pointed out that efforts to avoid an ecosystem collapse are pretty much disrupted or straight up blocked by, quote, inadequate understanding of the ecological mechanisms driving observed changes, unquote. And they're also stopped by, quote, misunderstanding the diversity among savanna types in their resistance and resilience to change. So basically, the authors, like the reason they wrote this paper, they're calling for one, more research into specific areas that would increase our understanding of these ecosystems and how they actually function, especially like on a local level, because there's so much diversity. We're looking at a continental scale, right? There's like so much diversity in that continent that like we really need to understand local systems. But number two, they're also calling for better policies for developing like management strategies at a local level, because we do understand a lot about how these ecosystems function, and often that understanding does not translate into public policy because there's like a block in learning there and people just don't understand how savannas work. So yeah, that's what they're doing with this paper. And I'm super freaking excited to tell you some things I learned about savannas in Africa.
Amazing.
Great.
I can't get away from savannas, guys. It's killing me. Actually, fun fact, I got onto this topic because I was trying to figure out how grasses became, like, why are grasses a thing? Then I got down a weird rabbit hole that became its own episode. So
Nice.
we'll somehow touch onto that later, I promise.
Cool. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, a couple prerequisites to this like whole idea that I think that we need to discuss at the beginning because it was important to the authors of the paper. And honestly, like no shade to a little bit of shade to the authors. I feel like they didn't really describe this premise well in the paper itself. And so I was reading this paper and I was like, I don't understand what you mean by like ecosystem services. Like you really glossed over that. So basically the whole point of their paper is hinged on this like ecological philosophy topic, which is like basically a two-part argument, okay? Number one, these savanna ecosystems provide essential services to the people who live there. Number two, in order for people to continue living here and to support a growing population, the ecosystem must be preserved because these services are essential to the continuation of human life in these regions.
Correct.
Yeah.
Those are some big stances, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it's like that obviously applies to all ecosystems.
Yeah.
And I want to say also there's obviously other reasons and like philosophical and ethical points of view on why conservation matters. But like I think when you're talking about like especially government policies, you kind of have to talk about economics. Mm-hmm. Arguing for governments especially, I think people who have like human concerns at the center of their focus and aren't really super educated on environmental concerns, like it's very easy to say like who cares, let's just plow it all up, like it's not really benefiting us directly. So some of the services, we cannot understate how important savanna wildlife tourism is and hunting, because that contributes literally hundreds of millions of dollars to African economies. And the thing about this is, you know, this really diverse set of both plants and animals that exist in Africa are endemic to that continent. They can't be found anywhere else. And like, especially, you know, charismatic megafauna, like this is a huge freaking deal. Like this is basically Africa's entire PR system, right? Yeah. They are only found in those regions and are central to that entire economic system. So like, that's a really direct reason why the ecosystem matters to African economies. Some of the other things are like provision of water and food. So, you know, a healthy ecosystem is providing the correct amount of water resources and food resources for people, whether that's like supporting grazing livestock, agriculture, you know, maintaining climatic conditions that allow you to have the rainfall you need to produce all of the food and water that you have. It's a pretty central thing, especially with water management. So that's huge. Medicines, grazing for livestock, timber and grass for construction, and fuel wood and charcoal are all listed as being of huge significance. So in total, that's an annual value exceeding $9 billion that the savannas are bringing to African economies.
Dang, yeah, that's huge.
So switching to the ecology of African savannas, we are looking specifically at like human impacts, human-caused impacts to these places. So there are 4 main threats that are directly caused by humans to these ecosystems. Those things are not going to be super surprising probably, but they are land clearing, altered disturbance, so that's referring to both grazing and fire, which are, of course, main drivers of savanna ecology. They need those forms of disturbance. Humans change that pressure all the time. Rising CO2, which we'll get to, and general climate change, which is impacting precipitation levels and other climatic factors that are completely outside of like biotic factors.
Sure.
So yeah, for people who are listening who are not super into ecology, basically this ecosystem is like an entire web of both like biotic, that's like plants and animals and stuff, and abiotic, which is everything else, factors. And pushing on any of these nodes by humans on that web can have really dramatic and sometimes unpredictable changes. And this is a process of trying to parse that out. So we've talked, of course, about fire, grazing, and woody encroachment and stuff like that a lot on this podcast. But one of the things that I found super eye-opening here was carbon dioxide, CO2. And here's the direct quote from the paper, quote, "The fate of the African savanna biome may be bound intrinsically to rising atmospheric CO2 in ways that other biomes are not."
Okay, why is that? It
has to do with plants.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. It has to do with C3 versus C4 plants.
Uh-huh.
Okay,
Yeah.
so Nicole's shaking her
Blast
head.
from the past.
Yeah, right?
High school biology. Okay.
Yeah. Does anybody here feel even like a little bit confident in trying to describe what the difference is? I will help you, but yes.
I don't know. Okay, so it has to do with oh god. Does it have something to do about like or like a big fundamental difference is like what time are they actually doing their gas exchanges? Like aren't one of them is like primarily more nocturnal, one of them is more diurnal?
Yes, that is there. So there are actually 3 different types of plants, and I should probably say, like, first of all, that it's like a photosynthesis thing. Like C3 and C4 listeners we're talking about photosynthesis and different ways that plants do that. So there's a third one called CAM. I'm not gonna try to pretend like I know what that stands for, but that's the one you're talking about, Alan. That's like desert plants tend to do that, and
Gotcha. Okay.
they have like a special adaptation where they can like basically separate the light part of photosynthesis from the breathing part, so that they can like breathe at night when they're not losing water, basically.
Guys, I went to school to study birds and mammals. Okay. I don't know a lot of plant stuff.
Hey,
Yeah.
that's
And,
so fun.
you know, I'm doing my best.
You are doing way better than a lot of people would.
Nicole, you probably what do you think it is? Because I feel like you actually know.
Yeah, come on,
I've
Nicole.
already exposed myself as being an idiot, so I would like you to please actually tell us.
The only thing that was sticking out to me was the time of day too. So that's all I got.
Shoot.
Yeah,
okay.
to be straightforward with you guys, that's also the thing that I remembered. So I had to really research this.
All
Because again, this paper glossed over that. And I was like, hold on, I feel like I need to take like a refresher course here.
Yeah.
Okay, what were you going to say?
The only plant-specific class that I took wasn't even plant-specific. It was plant and animal interactions.
Oh,
so,
Ooh,
aka
okay.
insects primarily. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Damn. I was a huge nerd about this stuff, and I used to tutor people on photosynthesis, so I felt embarrassed that I couldn't remember, but I also could not remember, and I had to go look it up.
Nice.
Right on. But it's like, okay, so what is this the C? Is it carbon?
Carbon. Yeah.
Okay, so is it like it just like it has something to do with like the way they package up
Yeah. Okay.
sugars or something?
I had a problem when I was researching this, which is that I got like very technical, and then I realized that is not what anybody wants to hear is like the chemistry reactions of like what's happening here.
Right. No, yeah.
So here's what I parsed out. So basically, super basic, photosynthesis only works well when there's a high concentration of carbon dioxide inside the plant. So refresher course for people who aren't like super into biology. Carbon dioxide is what plants breathe in, and they tend to exhale oxygen. So like they want the CO2, that's their jam, right? Mm-hmm. They need a lot of CO2 around so that photosynthesis works, because if there's too much O2 around, if there's too much oxygen around, the chemical reaction goes stupid and it doesn't actually work. So like that's how photosynthesis itself works, no matter what process you're talking about.
Okay.
Is that it needs a high concentration of CO2. So here's where maybe there wouldn't be a high concentration of CO2 in the plant, and that's when they're like holding their breath, basically. This is very much an analogy and not how it actually happens, but plants basically breathe during the day for the most part. They like open their little pore cells called stomata, right? And this wastes water, because then like they lose their little waterproofing. They're covered in like little pores and they sweat out water or whatever. So sometimes they hold their breath basically and close that up to save water, like at night, or when it's super hot, they'll hold their breath. Mm-hmm. So then when plants are holding their breath, that's when they've gone through all the CO2 and oxygen starts to build up in their bodies. So think about that like humans. Like if we held our breath, we'd have more carbon dioxide in our blood.
Makes sense.
So the majority of plants are C3 plants. It's like 85% of all plants are C3. They don't have any special adaptations. It's just regular photosynthesis. And basically when they close up their pores at night to stop breathing, oxygen will build up in their cells, and they waste a whole bunch of energy doing accidental bad chemistry because they don't have enough CO2. Here's where C4 plants are different. So they have a special adaptation, that guarantees that under any condition, the plant always has a high concentration of CO2, because it basically puts that whole chemical reaction that can go AWOL into like a panic room off to the side where no oxygen can get in. But then they waste a lot of energy like shuttling the carbon dioxide in and out of the panic room, if that makes sense.
Okay.
No matter what the plant is doing, there's always a high concentration of carbon dioxide. They're not wasting energy. They're like super efficient. And only 3% of all vascular plants use this type of respiration. They tend to be abundant in the heat and they're less abundant in the cold, probably because spending the extra energy to like have a panic room basically for this chemical reaction is worth it in hot conditions where you're more likely to wish you had it.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Are you tracking me so far? I feel like this is a lot of like, I tried so hard to like make this simplified.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I get it.
So it is more energy efficient to have this kind of photosynthesis.
In hot conditions, in like the tropics, for example, where it's like hot all of the time, that's where it becomes really beneficial to use up the extra energy to do this type of respiration. So like the plant is spending energy to get things moved into a panic room. They would also be spending energy on wasted chemical reactions that don't need to happen if they didn't have the panic room. Basically, it's like a scale, right? And in hot environments, it becomes worth it to spend the extra energy to make the panic room because you're saving in so many other areas of your photosynthesis.
Okay.
So it's still a net gain even though you are spending energy
Yes.
to do that. Okay.
And so basically that's why we tend to see a lot more C4 plants in really hot environments, and they tend to decrease in frequency in like temperate environments. The reason this matters in the African biome is that this biome is dominated by the C4 grasses in a way that other biomes are not. Like here in the Great Plains, we have both C3 and C4 grasses. We tend to like refer to them as cool season and warm season grasses, and they tend to grow in cool season and warm season because they're differently adapted in that way. But here's like an interesting quote as to why that is. So the authors state, quote, C4 grassy vegetation first expanded globally in a low CO2 atmosphere 5 to 10 million years ago. An event linked to altered regional climates and fire regimes and the colonization of Africa by bovid mesoherbivores. So basically, Africa came to be the Africa that we imagine during a period of low atmospheric carbon dioxide. And because there was low atmospheric carbon, these plants that were really good at saving up the carbon and like keeping a high concentration of carbon dioxide in their cells, even when maybe there wasn't in the atmosphere, they were able to dominate.
Sorry, that was how long ago?
5 to 10 million years ago.
5 to 10 million. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. All right.
So not like dinosaur levels. Like,
Right.
this is where I like overlapped my like where did grasses come from concept. But like dinosaurs never ate grasses. Grasses came later, and C4 grasses began to dominate in the African region in that time period when there was low atmospheric carbon, and that's when they really excelled and like began to dominate the globe and became really prevalent in the tropics, where like to this day the heat conditions make their form of photosynthesis still a benefit. So yeah, I thought that was freaking fascinating. So this matters today because C3 plants, aka most plants on the planet, are really, really susceptible to increases in carbon dioxide. So we understand that carbon dioxide won't really have like a huge impact on C4 plants because like they're already good at being efficient with carbon. Whereas C3 grasses like are very inefficient at using their carbon. So increasing atmospheric carbon dioxide basically fertilizes every other plant on the planet and like makes them super, super efficient at growing and spreading and doing plant things, which gives them an edge over C4 plants. That's why the African savanna biome is severely impacted in a way that other biomes aren't, because like C4 grasses like had their origins there and dominated there in a way that like created this landscape. And so with all of the issues that we're seeing, like woody encroachment and stuff, like that's probably only going to be exacerbated by global carbon dioxide increasing, because like the grasses are going to have an even harder time fighting back against woody encroachment.
Okay.
Potentially.
Not good.
Yeah, okay, that was a lot of explanation to arrive at that conclusion. I could have just said that, I guess, but I thought it was fun to go down a little, like, bio-organic chem thing. I am so sorry for listening.
I think
It's good.
it's important. I mean, what's going on in all that grass, you know? What's it doing all day?
Yeah.
It's doing stuff. It's got things going on inside of it.
No, it's
It does.
doing stuff. It sure is.
It's just keeping it secret. But now we know.
Oh, man. Yeah, so basically CO2 is, like, probably going to have a pretty, like, direct impact on African savannas becoming, like, a closed canopy forest.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Great. Cut down trees sometimes in this instance.
You're doing great.
Well, now I'm embarrassed at how much time I spent on chemistry when I thought I was doing a really good job of explaining it, but
if
it's
you
fine.
want to re-explain it shorter, like you can.
I
That's the
don't
whole
want to. It's fine.
part
Do you
about
wanna
doing
speedrun it?
podcasts.
C4 plants spend extra energy in order to protect the chemical reaction of
Yeah.
photosynthesis.
Yeah.
C3 plants don't. They just do it passively, and it's wasteful.
Yes. So they're going to do better on their own
Right.
just by there being more carbon dioxide around, because they're like, blah, 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 who cares about
Yes.
our chemical reactions, blah, blah, blah.
Exactly. So it's like if you were taking a spoon and you were like
I'm ready.
trying to flip rice into your mouth.
Yeah.
Okay. It's like a C4 plant is just like or C3 plant is just like trying to flip like loose grains of rice into its face.
Okay.
Okay. But a C4 plant has like, ooh, I'm gonna wrap this rice in like a little
In a trebuchet.
seaweed, like in a little nori
Oh,
wrap.
what? Okay.
So then it's like I got a little bundle of rice. So that's like, boom, I spent extra time to wrap my rice in nori. Now I'm gonna flip the whole like pack into my face.
Guys, we should
Efficient.
really write chemistry courses.
We
I think this
should.
is really good.
But
Yeah.
if you replace that rice with like a hand, like a shovel, and then shovel rice into your face,
You're
more
gonna get rice.
You're gonna get rice
Yeah,
anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The rice is the CO2 and it's killing the planet.
I love it.
I think that's a great explanation. Thank you.
All right.
Holy moly. So like, yeah, that's why carbon dioxide is specifically affecting African savannas. I do want to kind of define really quickly like what the concept of degradation in these savanna landscapes even looks like to begin with, because the paper does that and people need to know that, even though some of it is stuff we've talked on before. I will try to focus on new information for podcast listeners. But of course, obviously, it's complex. Shut up.
Another complex thing?
Another complex thing. I mean, it's
Hooray.
a continent, you guys.
Uh-oh.
So I think the main issue is woody encroachment in African savannas. So I think it's important for like listeners hearing this to keep in mind that like when we're talking about woody encroachment, like that equates to habitat loss for animals that live there. Like we're talking about habitats that are changing into something else, which means that those habitats are being lost, even though they might still exist and still be like nature reserves or like whatever, undeveloped land. It is still lost habitat if they're something they're not supposed to be.
For sure.
So like we haven't really studied the impacts of tropical woody encroachment on like climactic things like weather patterns and soil chemistry. And I bring that up because that is very well known about forests being deforested. And I think this again ties into like how we tend to wrap any landscape with trees into being a forest. It's that like deforestation continues to be the kind of go-to environmental fear that we have as humans for what it looks like to destroy the environment. And like to the point where we haven't even really fully researched what forestation or like woody encroachment would do to
That's
degrade the
interesting.
savanna.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that makes sense because it's like, yeah, I mean, when we were kids, like that was the number one, like, you know, the environmental, like,
Yeah.
panic was like, oh, you know, clearing the Amazon or cutting down old growth forests. And
Yeah.
like, you don't really think about like, there are other ways that the plant community can change.
Yeah.
Right. And there are some savannas where, planting trees may be a solution, but that is absolutely not true in most African savannas. And like I think a really good example of like what you're talking about, Alan, has to do with elephants. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I've attended like seminars or like lectures on elephants. And like, I know even the Sedgwick County Zoo here, where we are locally, has done lectures on elephants because, we have exhibits and stuff. And in Africa, like megafauna like elephants and stuff are like a really important element in pushing back plants because they're rough on trees and plants. And I think that really also makes African savannas unique on a global scale because like nobody else really has things like elephants that are literally pushing around the trees. Obviously there are elephants in other parts of the world too. I'm not really familiar with them, but I think like Asian elephants live in forests, right?
Yeah.
So it's a different landscape and a different interaction with the plants. African elephants freaking destroy trees all the time. And like I have some really distinct memories of attending seminars where people are talking about like how horrible it is that elephants are destroying trees. And, again, this is a nuanced topic. So, it is definitely true that if there are too many of any big destructive animal or any type of animal at all in a small area, like they can have a completely disproportionate impact on the environment than they would otherwise. Yeah. But like there's never a nuanced discussion about it. It's always like, oh man, the elephants destroy so many trees and that's so terrible. But it's like, that's what they're supposed to do.
Right.
They're supposed to be doing that. And like the trees that live around them are adapted to that and survive it really freaking well and bounce back really freaking well. But like we all collectively lose our minds when we see an elephant destroying a tree, even though that's literally what they're all supposed to be doing, is being destroyed and destroying things. Like that's what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah.
I have a lot of feelings about this. Well,
that sums up a lot of people's attitudes toward fire as well.
Yeah.
Like people think like, oh, like if this field full of red cedars were to like, I don't know, burn to the ground, it'd be real bad, But it's like, well, no, it'd be okay.
That's what they want to happen.
Yeah,
like they're craving the flame. They're like, please burn me. Like I want the fire to lick me to the ground. Like,
right.
I don't know if they want to be taken to the ground, but yeah.
Well, you know what I mean. They want to be stubble. Yeah. And so I point this out because like it does seem pretty obvious to us because we talk about it all the time and we're like grasslands people, but it's really very much not apparent still to lay people.
Yeah.
And even the authors pointed out that talking about removing trees is controversial. So here's a quote they had about this. Quote, "It is vital that forest and landscape restoration programs develop clear criteria for identifying degraded areas and developing appropriate restoration strategies. In the case of savannas degraded by woody plant encroachment, these appropriate strategies may controversially include tree removal." And like we have to define these things because otherwise we as humanity just assume like trees equals good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And screw the elephants. They're too mean to trees.
Yes.
I'm just kidding. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This brings to mind all the like plant a tree programs and stuff where like a lot of times, I mean, not every single program, but a lot of them are not only planting monocultures, which are never helpful, but a lot of times they're planting like straight up non-native trees into like a grassland. And it's like, it's supposed to be a grassland. Please stop planting trees.
Like, how long ago was it that the state began planting Russian olive trees around everywhere in Kansas? Like, why was that ever a thing? They changed soil chemistry now. Like, that's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird.
It is weird.
It's a weird choice.
Yeah.
Yep. Cool. So, that's all I've really got for those, like, defining degradation. It's there's a lot more complexity to it, but, like, on the continental scale, woody encroachment is the biggest issue.
Sure.
So, the next little section that I wanted to talk about that I thought was cool was the actual functional traits of plants in this landscape and the ways that they mediate all of the different responses of the savanna to these human impacts. Because it's another piece of the puzzle, right? Like, we're trying to conserve a landscape. In order to do that, we have to understand, like, how are plants responding in different ways to different things? And it's also like a lot of cool plant adaptations. And it's like, that's neat. I didn't know that was a thing. How neat is that? What, Nicole? Why are you laughing
I'm
at
sure
me?
the listeners can hear it, but Rachel is like dancing behind the mic right now.
Thank
It's hilarious.
I'm so... I literally wrote like a little emoji into my text here, which I never do.
Was it a dance emoji?
Okay. So the sort of traits we're talking about here include like defenses against herbivores, because like having herbivores around is a thing humans do, and also the wildlife does, whatever. Resistance to fire, nitrogen fixing and fungal relationships, etc., which honestly I skipped over because I don't really get soil and I'm not really like interested in talking about it.
Do you not care about fungus?
I do.
Dude, we'll get into it. Okay.
Oh no. Well, I guess like I don't know enough about it. I've never had like a soil class. I don't understand it. There's so much there, and my brain has not absorbed anything that has to do with soil ever in my life. I'm not about to try starting now from scratch as a footnote to this topic. So
It's okay.
thank you.
We'll talk about it.
Thank you. Canopy architecture. So like how close together are things growing and how bushy are they, blah, blah, blah. And like whether they can sprout out a whole bunch of clones and stuff. Like those are all different like traits that plants have that like change how they respond to things around them. Very straightforward. And what's kind of cool about like these continental wide things is that we can kind of map out like which dominant plants there are in certain regions, and then like make predictions about how those regions will resist change or fight back against change, etc., which will help us to map out like how our responses should be different in local environments. So that's pretty neat. And like we do that by literally mapping out what the functional traits of those plants are against like their abundance and maybe some like climate factors. And so we can have like they had the authors a map of different regions based on their plant structure and their responses to different changes and stuff. Like we can map this out. It's pretty freaking cool stuff. And we can also leverage those things to do good conservation work. So that's pretty neat. So felling trees and cutting them down is another human impact. And what's cool about African savanna trees is that they are super, super, super resilient to damage. Again, because unlike most places, they evolved alongside freaking elephants and stuff. So like they're used to being destroyed. If it's chronic, that can be bad and can lead to the death of the tree, but they're pretty good at bouncing back. For example, elephants, they will strip bark off of a tree, pull off branches, completely topple the entire trunk of a tree. And the trees are like, all right.
All right.
Yeah, they'll just like all grow back, I guess. Like, thanks, elephant. Like,
do they say thank you after all that?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Because
Okay,
they can't
not.
speak. Yeah.
Yeah.
Their stomata aren't lips. But that would be crazy if they were.
Be terrifying.
Oh, I'm picturing a real fever dream of an animation right now.
Okay.
So, basically, the presence of these giant herbivores mean that plants are super good at bouncing back from this stuff, which is really important because it means, like, as far as, like, trying to restore places, I don't know, the work's cut out for us in this sense anyway. So here's a quote from the paper I thought was cool. In combination with the consumption of seedlings, damage caused by large mammals can reduce woody plant cover in African savannas more than 10-fold because they have such a destructive habit, especially with saplings. So because of this, another quote, here, biomass and biodiversity can rapidly recover after short periods under cultivation. This is important because the fastest net losses of woody plant cover in African savannas are occurring in the Miombo savannas, distributed in wet subtropical climates south of the equator, which is, they described as one of the places where plants are especially adapted to bouncing back from mega herbivores, just kicking them to the ground. So, like, that's really handy because the places where we are losing tree cover, and that might be a problem, it's a pretty narrow region, but, like, the trees there are really good at bouncing back, and it would not take much effort on our part to get it back to functionality.
Cool.
Yeah. The other thing is herbivory, which is different from just getting kicked to the ground by an elephant, because that's just getting eaten or whatever. So, quote, woody plants in savannas resist browsing via a range of physical and chemical defenses. Cage architecture, spinescence, and small leaves restrict or prevent mammalian herbivores from accessing foliage, and chemical defenses reduce leaf digestibility or make the foliage toxic. End quote.
And what are those weird words that you said?
Yeah, you just said spinescence like it was a normal word
Yeah.
that comes up a
And
lot.
caging or
A
something?
cage architecture. Okay, this is actually pretty freaking cool. And cage architecture is basically like plants that are like, God, I'm going to get eaten if I'm a delicious sapling. So they basically grow as a sapling to be like a cage of just inaccessible grossness and spines, or it like depends on the plant, but like just like a cage around like the juicy parts so that like they can't get eaten. It's harder to eat them. It's not worth it. And then they can survive to adulthood maybe.
Okay.
They don't get stepped on by an elephant.
Yeah, or they're less likely to. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And this is different from like the other type that we're probably used to seeing is called like hang on, let me find it. It's pole architecture. Yeah, pole architecture, which is where they just grow straight up like a pole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that is more common in areas affected by fire because the tree is like racing to get as tall as possible so that it can escape flames and not get top killed by fires.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then spinescence? Yep, can't even say it.
Oh, that just means being spiny.
Oh, okay.
Right. The state of being spiny.
Scientists like to use
Spinescence?
really confusing words, and it's pretty outrageous.
It's a little unnecessary
Yeah.
sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah.
It could be a good trivia word, though.
That's true.
Real benefit.
It's a good trivia word.
today.
Yeah.
Spinescence.
It's good stuff.
Yeah. So basically, there's like tons of spiny species that exist across the continent, and we see continental scale a pretty big difference in like dry savannas and more wet savannas. So in dry open savannas, there tend to be less frequent fires, and so plants there tend to be more like, I gotta protect myself from the freaking elephants. And so they will put more of their energy into beating herbivory. Whereas in wetter savannas, they're more concerned about fire just because of the way that the grasses are growing in those environments and other factors. They're more likely to get burned up in more wet savannas. So those plants are like, I'm gonna shoot up like a pole and try to beat the fire and put more effort into my fire resistance.
It's interesting that the places with more precipitation would be more concerned about fire. You'd have
Yeah.
plants
Right?
that are more fire resilient than in dry savannas, which you would think are like
Yeah.
a huge tinderbox.
But that makes sense when you consider that grasses are a plant in these environments too, and that a lot more precipitation is allowing for a lot like bigger mass and volume of grasses in the environment. So
Right.
not only are some grasses in dry savannas resistant to fire altogether, they tend to take a long time to accumulate biomass because of the way that they're growing. And these guys had like a whole section on the grass structures and stuff. I think it's pretty straightforward and self-explanatory, so I'm not going to spend like a lot of time going on it. But it is true that like in the wetter savannas, like they tend to be like big bushy canopies they of grass. They tend to be a lot more flammable, and so the fires there tend to be much more intense.
Oh, that makes sense.
It's
Okay.
accumulating
Yeah.
like fuel much more quickly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's interesting about this is that we do have like a pretty clear breaking point climate-wise that will control for like where certain plants and ecosystems are even able to exist versus not exist. And that threshold is like rainfall. So we can say, hey, as long as the savannas are getting this much rainfall, we can expect to see plants doing these things. If we get below that threshold, we expect them to be like not as flammable, kicking elephants, focusing more on herbivory. So we know what to expect based on that climate factor, and that's going to really help us be like, ooh, how do we like beat climate change? Yeah. Okay. Everything's fire. So just as a refresher for people who don't listen to every episode, plants can have thick, corky bark, special buds. They can have below ground energy stores, which we actually saw before in the Brazilian savannas with woody plants there. They had like, underground like stems, which my silly Kansan brain thought only grasses could do. No, trees do that all the time and shrubs too. And I guess in Africa, it can get really intense. Like they can straight up create what were described as underground trees. Underground trees or geoxyles, which is basically an entire underground network of woody stems and roots. And when everything gets killed by a fire, the plant is like, who cares? My entire like tree is underground, so I'll just sprout back up. geoxyle. The other thing that's cool about plants is that, they tend to change over their lifetimes and their growth habits depending on how frequent fires are. So if, for example, there's an area that really hasn't had a lot of fires, the plants probably haven't been putting as much effort into their underground systems as, say, a tree that's been burned every year. So that means, hey, if this place hasn't been burned in a long time and there's too much woody encroachment, like maybe a fire would be slightly more effective there because the plants are like, oops, what's this? I'm sort of adapted to it, but I didn't think this would happen. So that's pretty neat. Drought kills savanna trees, which makes sense because in general, trees require more water than grasses. Mm-hmm. So they're like, oops, I'm dead when there's drought.
Yeah. Okay.
And what I thought was cool was that, like, in African savannas, the main way that trees avoid drought being an issue is by just killing all of their leaves. And so the main, like, way that they are affected besides just dying is how early their leaves emerge and how soon they kill them off, because a lot of them are deciduous and it's based on water availability.
Oh, interesting. So during during the wet season,
yeah, they got leaves for days.
Season.
Yeah, in the dry season, they're like, oops, I don't want to lose my water, so, like, screw these leaves. And then, of course, there's rising carbon dioxide, which is like, holy cow, we don't even know fully how rising carbon dioxide, like, plants are adapted to that or would change with that. The thing about rising carbon dioxide, too, is that it has, like, a weird indirect relationship with plant-water relationships because of the way that heat is influencing photosynthesis, right? So there's a lot of factors involved there. There have been a couple of experiments with 2 African mimosoid savanna trees. Those are the, like, plants that have, like, firecracker flowers, like mimosas. And that demonstrated that there are strong positive effects on increased atmospheric CO2 on their stuff. Like, they grow faster, they store energy faster, and all of this means that they bounce back way quicker after fire or herbivore damage. So basically, saplings' survival is definitely increased to a measurable degree based on what those trees are experiencing in savannas. But unfortunately, we just don't have a lot of information overall on this specific landscape and these specific sets of environmental, like, conditions, right? So we have information on, like, how trees respond to CO2 and how grasses respond to CO2 and stuff, but they don't really take into context things like the soil nutrients of these landscapes. Because remember, I skipped that whole section, but that was important.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
In ways that make it more complex, which is what I want you to understand.
Yes.
All we know is that these different hypothesized effects of carbon dioxide on woody plants has the potential to really change both, like, fuel characteristics of these landscapes for fire and competition for water and nutrients. So that would have implications for basically every sort of, like, human thing we can change, whether it's fire or grazing or whatever. And we just don't know yet. So let's do some research, guys. Yay. So how do human beings leverage these plant traits to do good environmental work? So, like, there's basically 3 potential interventions that we can take action on, urging more research, obviously. But the things we have control over really easily are fire, large-bodied mammals, and maintaining connected and unfragmented savanna landscapes. So, with fire, obviously, we can change the frequency and timing of fires. We have control over that. And woody encroachment can be just flat out erased this way, so we should be doing this. Except in order for it to even be effective, the prescribed fire has to actually match historical fire regimes and be, like, effective for that region. Mm-hmm. So this also has to be timed alongside, like, grazing management because, of course, the grazing that's happening will impact the fuel for the fire and how intense or effective they're even able to be. We also know that in low rainfall savannas, fire might not work to push back woody encroachment if that's an issue. Because in these environments, again, grasses accumulate more slowly. Some grasses aren't even very flammable. And so they recommend in those regions, maybe delay fire until the dry season, which is not really how most African land managers are doing things right now. I think that's also true here in North America. We tend to do all of our burning in the spring. So there are cases to be made in a lot of places for changing the seasonality of our fires depending on local needs, which I think is cool.
Yeah.
My favorite additional strategy that relates to fire that I thought was pretty freaking cool was intentionally creating intense tree crown fires.
Ooh.
Which I was like, whoa, that's a thing. But, I guess these occur naturally in like really high wind, hot, dry conditions. And like, basically the idea is to create like big firestorms, and like when the leaves are all crunchy at the dry season, you just set the whole top of the tree on fire.
Nice.
And then you're top killing like a massive canopy, and that can be super effective in just destroying a severely encroached area.
That does sound fun.
Right?
Sounds dangerous.
It is super dangerous. I guess people do that in North America too. Like they referenced a specifically North American like land management strategy, which I had not. Well, maybe I'm suddenly remembering that there are forests in North America that like need fire, like conifer forests and stuff. I didn't read that study, but all I know is that we do it here too, apparently, and that delights me for some reason. I hate fire, but this delights me.
Yeah.
You hate fire personally, not as an ecological
of course.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really important as a tool. It scares the heck out of me on a personal level.
It probably should.
I will never again participate in a prescribed burn. My first experience was too traumatic.
It was a lot.
It was a lot for me. I think it was a lot for a few people who were also into fire, even though it was all perfectly under control for the record. It was never got out of control, but it was like pretty hot for a minute. Like
I didn't even burn all the hair off the back of my hand like I did last time.
Oh my God. Stresses me out. Anyway, there is like a downside, which is that, if there are forests nearby, they're really hard to stop. Like the big, I guess you can do other fire management things like making a break or whatever, but that's kind of rude if you're like dealing with a forest, I guess. It's hard enough to convince people to chop down savanna trees, let alone things next to forests. So like, maybe only do that in places where there aren't big national forests or something, and then you can kill all the trees.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. I mean, probably shouldn't burn down a national forest.
Exactly.
Right. No.
Well, that's what I'm trying to
one's
say.
advocating.
No, but thank you, Alan.
I just like that you clarified.
Oh, man. So number 2, large-bodied mammal communities. This can be both wild and domestic. Like, obviously, large-bodied domestic mammals have a big impact, too. Like, what if we just let them eat grass fuel and let them trample woody plants? Like, that's pretty neat. We could do that. And this is super effective at limiting woody encroachment in the dry, low rainfall places. So yeah, just, let Mother Nature take its course by crushing trees to the ground.
Now,
or eating babies, baby trees.
Again, good to clarify. Okay.
We have had episodes about eating baby animals.
Yeah,
so.
we have.
Oh, for
that
sure.
is a good clarification.
For sure. Okay, so now, I mean, as people who have advocated for, or at least understand the, regulatory environment of North America, how easy is it to... Like what I know the attitudes are very different in Africa. Like, I mean, for example, the attitudes towards elephants are very different in Africa. Like, especially, like between, farmers and landowners, because like you said, elephants do a number on stuff. Okay. Like they will smash your fences and wreck your crops. So
it's easy for me to be very like pro elephant when we're talking about like destroying trees and not human property. Like that is a very good point.
Yeah. Like there's a lot of, I would imagine there's a lot of conflicts there, and they're probably very different than the ones we would have here. I guess I did want to ask though, how large herbivore cultivation or how feasible is that? Because, like, I mean, you could say you could do the same thing here in North America, like, but you can't really reintroduce the bison anymore. Like it
Yeah.
can't, like, you know, they're unfortunately like kind of ecologically extinct. Like you couldn't bring them back in a way that would matter.
Yeah.
Could you do that with large African herbivores?
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting is that maybe there's like a little bit of a difference here in like the degree to which human settlement has like really encroached on habitats. Like we are concerned about fragmentation of habitats in Africa, but it's certainly not the top concern. Whereas I feel like that's more and more like the top concern of North American ecology. And I think another interesting component of this that we haven't really talked about, but definitely influences wild animals, is that there is a pretty significant poaching problem in Africa. And I point that out like it's like a novel concept because I think, you know, wildlife biologists, we from North America anyway, like our hunting environment is so different where, you know, poaching isn't really like a significant threat to any animals really anymore.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But it is absolutely a threat in those specific environments. And so I think restoring wild populations is probably a little bit easier in terms of land use, but difficult because of poaching and, you know, protecting those resources. Because again, like a huge part of the African economy in the savanna regions has to do with wildlife tourism and hunting of those animals too. So,
Right.
You know, I'm not 100% sure that I'm qualified in this moment to speak on like the lay people's attitude toward wildlife conservation or how they would be impacted, because I didn't really do a lot of research on that. All I know is that the authors of this paper and the folks who have cited them are advocating for policy change because as we're developing more lands, there are ways to develop it and to expand human population and to allow humans to have like a good sustainable life that will have the least impact on wildlife around them and will still allow for us to expand wildlife habitats and stuff like that. Possibility exists in a really material way. What was your original question?
It was just like, I mean, the feasibility of these proposals.
Yeah.
Like, it like, you know, obviously these are, I mean, qualified, like intergovernmental, you know, panel sort of people who know what they're dealing with. But
well,
so,
and like it's so hard to say because I think it is a thing that does seem feasible, and my impression is that the primary roadblock is education on what is needed to preserve the landscapes, and in terms of like wild animal conservation, being willing to not develop certain regions to maintain undisturbed tracts of land that are unfragmented, and also like trying to limit poaching of those large charismatic megafauna, if that makes sense.
No, yeah,
Okay.
for sure. I mean, yeah, I was just curious because, like, I mean, it is something that you know, it's an interesting question. Like, how different are the attitudes and what are the challenges that you would face? I mean, because it is completely different.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, we also have to remember that, like, I guess in other parts of the world, not North America, but in other parts of the world, climate change is treated as an existential crisis.
Yeah.
And it's like, this could be economically and, you know, existentially, like, devastating to the people who live here. Whereas in North America, it's kind of like, oh, yeah, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
Or, you know,
it's not
or
real.
it's not real, you know. So like, you know, we're still managing that hurdle, but in other places it's like a completely different situation.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And so I think, you know, this paper is really focusing on like the perspectives of policymakers and land managers who have like maybe some decision making capability. And I think it's fair to say that like no matter where you are, like people are concerned about their own survival probably first and foremost. But I think there's also a really deep love of the land that you're living in. And so it's all wildlife management is really just balancing like the needs of people to thrive and have like a good and sustainable life with the needs of the environment. And I think that's why I found this paper so compelling too, is because they were trying to really advocate for having these healthy ecosystems maintained being a direct benefit to people, which is so hard to get through to like anybody who is trying to do good conservation or rather doesn't, care about conservation or is, struggling to figure out how to like feed their community and things like that. Yeah, but there is a balance that can be made, and I imagine it varies on people, most like it does here.
Yeah.
So individuals and the different needs of local communities. I think that's also why I think it's important that we're emphasizing more local policies based on local ecosystems, because that also will help local communities meet their specific needs and not just trying to apply a blanket policy to everything across an entire continent of people. Like,
no, absolutely.
Let this community in this ecosystem have the best tools they need to work with the land that they're living in. Like,
for sure.
That's what we should all be doing.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. That is very cool that they're like, drilling down to, not like not like you said, not blanket solutions, but like what can this community do for its own savanna?
What are your plant's functional traits and how can you use that against climate change?
It's cool. It is. It's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was beautiful.
Wow.
Yeah, I guess the last little point has to do with the landscapes being unfragmented, which is pretty straightforward, but especially, in a landscape that's trying to make room for so many like huge animals, that it's especially important to try and decrease fragmentation, which can be like done if you're developing new places. It's a matter of sticking, to developing like a specific place and not really spreading out too much. There is absolutely a threshold under which a patch of land in these environments becomes too small to be ecologically beneficial. So ultimate goal is let's try to stop that from happening so that the savanna can remain like big enough to support fire management and herbivory and, everything that it's doing for fire and food management, water and food management, etc. Okay, cool. So in summary,
burn trees, cut down trees.
Yeah, also
start
burn them.
fires, stomp on plants, be an elephant.
Be an elephant.
Make room for elephants.
Exactly. Don't put barbed wire fence around every single square mile of your, landscape forever. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So these savanna ecosystems provide essential services, and in order for people to keep on being people in these landscapes everywhere, we gotta preserve the ecosystems so that we can keep on living our lives. And in order to do that, we need more research into specific areas that increase our understanding of how these ecosystems actually function to give us better management strategies on a local level with those plant communities and all their mitigation strategies. And we have to have better management policies at local levels. And you know what? We're starting with, please let us cut down some trees. So I think we can get there. I think we can make that happen.
That should be an easy sell, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Thank you, Rachel, for enlightening us just a little bit about African savannas.
Yeah, it was a little overview. So the next time we talk about it, we're going to have so much context.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love
It's
that.
going to be soon.
Oh, I should do a full-on elephant episode now. This is something. I'm dibs. Okay.
Dibs has been called.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
Elephants are very fun.
Okay.
And thank you for listening. The Best Biome is produced through our nonprofit Grassland Groupies, dedicated to inspiring the conservation of grasslands. In the show notes, you can find our website, phone number, and social media accounts. Text, call, or tweet your suggestions, fan mail, or hate mail. If you enjoyed the show and want to support us, tell your friends about us and leave a review on Podchaser or Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We couldn't do this without your support. See you again very soon.
Bye.
Bye.